welcome to ICCR's Empowering the People event. I'm Susanna McDermott, ICCR's Director of Communications, and along with my colleague David Schilling, Senior Program Director for Human Rights, will be your hosts for today's program.
Thanks, Susanna, and yes, a heartfelt welcome to all of you, ICCR members and other investors, our NGO partners, our corporate representatives, and a special thanks to our sponsors for your continued support of ICCR's mission and work to promote corporate accountability, work that is especially relevant in this moment. We are very grateful and happy that you've joined us.
The Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility will soon be celebrating 50 years. And there are more than a few of you with us today who have been there from the beginning and have borne witness to the growth and power of this important movement known as faith-based and socially responsible investing. While we are needing to be together virtually this year, we are nonetheless very excited to be together. We have a compelling program lined up for you, including a timely and much-needed discussion about the importance of accelerating the transition to renewable energy and doing so in a way that empowers people and ensures no one gets left behind. We'll hear from several thought leaders on the topic who will share their unique perspectives and experiences on the challenges and opportunities in moving a just transition forward. We also have a special musical guest, and the ICCR community will honor Susan Smith Makos of Mercy Investment Services, our 2020 Legacy Award winner, for her many achievements in corporate engagement and her long-term contributions to our coalition.
But first, we begin, as we always do, with a reflection to ground us, to center us, and inspire us. And for that, we will turn to our friend, Reverend John Vaughn. John currently serves as the executive pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, a church where Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. served for over 4 decades, and Martin Luther King Jr. was his home church for his entire life. For the last 9.5 years, John was the executive vice president at Auburn Theological Seminary, where he was a neighbor of ours on the 18th floor in the Interchurch Center. John is a dear friend, and I met him when we both worked at Riverside Church in the 1980s. And at Auburn, John really helped with the leadership development and research that equips leaders of faith and moral courage for multi-faith, multiracial movements for justice. A good person for us all to have as a partner and a friend. John, ICCR welcomes you warmly.
In this season, I've started to wonder if this is a wilderness moment for us. Instead of wandering in the desert like those in the Exodus story that we find in the Hebrew Bible, we're in a paradoxical wilderness of being in our homes. It's a wilderness where sheltering in place has forced us into different rhythms that pushed us away from the familiarity of ways that we do work, school, and relationships. Though we have found creative ways to stay connected, we have been physically disrupted. We are in a wilderness. It's also a season when the virus of racism, or as our senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist has called it, COVID-19, has been quite visible and unsettling. It's a virus that continues to morph and has just been relentless. We're in a wilderness. But being in a wilderness is not a wholly negative experience. It is an opportunity for preparation. It's an opportunity for reformation. It's a time to prepare for a new normal. So what does that preparation maybe look like for us? Well, in terms of COVID-19, it's a time to ground ourselves personally. What are you doing that grounds you? What is that discipline that keeps you focused? It's a time to reconnect with ourselves in this moment because we're home. We are oftentimes by ourselves or with our families. I think the second is that it's a time to reconnect with those that are closest to us. So though I'm in Atlanta, my family is still in New York City. And I actually didn't see them between the end of February and early July. And my two teenage sons and was home with my wife. And one of the things that happened is that in the epidemic, both boys started to cook. They started to bake. They started to make dinner. They started to do some new things that emerged naturally in the pandemic that would not have happened otherwise. But it was a time to discover new things and reconnect with each other in some new ways. It's also a time to reconnect with our communities. Who would have thought that we would be referring to a drive-by as a good thing? This past weekend, we had the drive-by family and friends picnic, and it was wonderful for people to see each other just in person, just for a few moments, as folks drive through and they gather their food. It was a time of reconnecting with our community. But also, in a COVID-19 world, this is also an opportunity for us to avoid the temptation to demonize each other and to hold each other accountable with love. This moment for me evokes some similar feelings when I was on staff at the Riverside Church in 1996 to 2000, when the Reverend Dr. James Forbes preached a sermon the day after Amadou Diallo was killed in the Bronx after police officers fired 41 shots and killed him in the vestibule of his home. Dr. Forbes painted this picture of this is really what the demonic possession of racism looks like. These were officers who were people who loved their families and their neighbors and at some point felt called to law enforcement out of a desire to serve communities, and yet they killed this man in the vestibule of his home. Our challenge is not get seduced into demonizing the people in the systems, but to recognize and name the demons in the people and in the systems. I think the other thing that's important for us in this COVID-19 world is to remember the power of love. The one thing I noticed was after the first night here in Atlanta, where a few protesters destroyed property, there were calls on social media to meet in our neighborhood, the Ebenezer neighborhood. And so NBA players Jaylen Brown, who drove 15 hours from Boston, and Malcolm Brogdon and others took to social media and they asked people to meet in our neighborhood. They met near our church to reflect and to march nonviolently, as if to say, this is really how we do things. We don't do violence, we do things nonviolently with love. So this is really a season of preparation. Our wilderness is a collective experience that is getting us ready for a world that is changing before our eyes. Let us not just focus on the challenges of this moment that can feel very overwhelming, but claim the exciting and wonderful things that are happening in our midst. This is a season of preparation for a world that will never be the same. I worship a God who takes lemons and makes lemonade and uses animal dung to make fertilizer. Let all of God's people say, amen.
Amen. And thank you, John. An important message for all of us to hear. We are indeed preparing and reconnecting with each other in new ways. In fact, we were just discussing that with our community this morning. And I think in this new world, we're all making a lot of lemonade as well.
Hi, everyone. This song, Fight for You, is about the urgent need to stand up for our planet and about how when we give into complacency, we are actually a part of the problem. I wrote it during the Standing Rock movement and dedicate it to all water protectors. I want to thank all of you out there who are choosing to take action and stand up for our environment and protect our planet. Thank you to ICCR members for your long-term efforts to fight for environmental justice. Save the river, save the seas, save the mother and her family. How can you take what you want and say that we are free? If you put oil in the water, we won't sit quietly. And we were cheering, stand up for what's right. Don't walk silently into the light. Take my hand and we'll see this through. If you fight for me, I'll fight for you. Save the oceans and the trees. Save the people who are in need. How can you do what you want and say you come in peace? If you don't open your eyes, how can you see? And we were cheering, stand up for what's right. Don't walk silently into the light. Take my hand and we'll see this through. If you fight for me, I'll fight for you. And don't look down when we march downtown for some truth, 'cause you can't complain if you don't find a way to stand up. Stand up for what's right. Don't walk silently into the light. Take my hand and we'll see us through. Stand up for what's right. Don't walk silently into the light. Take my hand and we'll see this through. If you fight for me, I'll fight for you. If you fight for me, I'll fight for you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, let's move now to our panel discussion. But to help set the context for that a bit, we'll begin with a conversation between Vonda Brunsting, our moderator for the panel, and Elizabeth Yampierre of Uprose. Vonda Brunsting is the program manager for the Just Transition Project at Harvard's Initiative for Responsible Investment. Before joining Harvard, she was the director of Capital Stewardship Program at SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, which was created to engage the capital markets and financial institutions in innovative ways. Elizabeth Yampierre is a national leader in the climate justice movement. She's the executive director of Uprose, Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. Her award-winning vision for an intergenerational, multicultural, and community-led organization is the driving force behind Uprose. Elizabeth is a longtime advocate and trailblazer for community organizing around just, sustainable development, environmental justice, and community-led climate adaptation and community resiliency in Sunset Park. Please welcome Elizabeth and Vonda.
Hello, everyone, and a special welcome to Elizabeth. Thanks for joining the ICCR community today. I'm so excited to talk with you about Just Transition. We've come to this topic as investors just recently. We've worked on climate, we've worked on social issues, but the Just Transition offers us a way to think about them and work on them together. But you and other community groups and workers have been really trying to address the just transition and fighting for it for a long time. So I wonder if we could just start today by having define what you mean by just transition.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me, Vondra. This is a conversation that that has to be had right now, and I think that the people who are in the room are the people who need to hear it. When we came together as a movement to talk about what a just transition was, we were really thinking about, and that's what we're operationalizing right now, how we move away from fossil fuel extraction to a renewable energy economy. It's what people are now calling a Green New Deal, and we refer to as a frontline Green New Deal. And so all over the country, including in Brooklyn, where I am right now, we have done things like operationalize community-owned solar cooperatives and are working on battery storage, a host of possibilities that exist, all in the name moving towards a different kind of economy. And what we have right now is a real opportunity to create new equitable models of investment and procurement. And so as the movement, on a very local basis, that's what we're doing. We're trying to move as quickly as possible because we feel like time is up.
Yeah, that's a great message to start on. Time is up. Mm-hmm. So you've been a champion for environmental justice in New York, and you've seen a lot of victories, including recently for people who know Brooklyn and Industry City. I wonder how you see your local efforts enhancing a national conversation about climate change and the just transition.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned Industry City because that was exactly what we're talking about today. There was a private developer. There is a private developer that was looking at the industrial waterfront as a place to bring in office jobs, and in the age of COVID and retail. And we were thinking about what an industrial sector for the future looks like, how we address climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. How do we take advantage of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which projects about 150,000 jobs in the next 10 years, and the Climate Mobilization Act, New York City, the local law 70. That's 40,000 jobs. So we have been working for years to pass legislation to make it possible to get an investment in our local communities to actually make these industrial sectors economic vehicles for climate jobs, strengthen social cohesion, and address the region's climate needs. And so that was a victory for climate justice. And so for us, Sunset Park isn't the only industrial waterfront community in the United States. We see these things as replicable models that can happen all over the United States, where we're looking at infrastructure and we're looking at local community needs and regional needs as opportunities for investment so that we can start preparing our regions and parts of the country for disruption, for the kind of disruption that we think climate change brings. So that's a perfect example. That was a 7-year fight, and literally it took all of our time and resources to be able to do that. And the model that we came up with is this thing called the GRID, which is a comprehensive waterfront plan that sort of checks all the boxes about what is necessary to make our region climate adaptable in the age of climate change. And I think that private investors should be thinking about what does an economy look like that is going to be disrupted by climate change? How will we be able to thrive in the future? And I think that conventional dated thinking is not going to survive the changes that are coming. This is really the time to start thinking about procurement policies and thinking about where do we get our materials? How do we build? How do we build permeable surfaces? Where does that come from? Really sort of on a granular level, communities like this one that have very limited real estate and have some that's completely dedicated to the industrial uses, we need to be looking at that. What does sustainable manufacturing look like? And how do we make sure we use these spaces in ways that is fundamentally different than the past? In the past, we had a clunky, polluting infrastructure that as part of the environmental justice movement, we wanted to take out and we worked to take out. And now we're looking at climate justice. How do we work for a future that is climate adaptable, carbon neutral, and it stimulates the local economy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Well, it's very inspiring to hear the victories. And I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about the community that we're speaking with today. The audience here at ICCR is investors, and it's a really unique group of investors because in addition to, through shareholder resolutions and engagement with companies, investors, as part of ICCR, try to change company behavior. It's also a group that looks to other stakeholders to bring into those dialogues. That's unique, I think, in the world of investor engagement. We also are confronted by the fact that around the just transition, we have these silos where you have workers on the one side and you've got community groups and you've got investors over here, companies over here. So do you have any advice for us on how we can break down those silos, knowing that there's a huge appetite, I think, within the ICCR community to do that?
I think that is the question, right? The question really is, how do we engage in messy, honest conversations that we need to have right now? We have been having to fight, in the environmental justice and climate justice movement, we always talk about the workers. We always stand in solidarity with unions, but unions don't always stand in solidarity with us. And so we found, for example, with Industry City, 32BJ and carpenters literally protesting the community when they were fighting for a small number of unguaranteed jobs, and we were fighting for climate jobs. And so there needs to be a way of building alignment with the rank and file and with this understanding that the rank and file actually lives in the communities that are going to be most impacted. And then as far as our investors, I an economy look like in the face of climate change? And how do you invest in an economy that looks radically different? And how do we start moving away from what we want instead of what we need? That looks very different and it's really uncomfortable. And if we don't make those decisions now, those decisions are going to be made for us. And so what does that look like? How do we ensure that there's food security, that we are building in a way that will make it possible for us to survive all of the changes that are coming? And if you think about COVID, right now is a good time. Right now, the market is completely unstable. We don't know what's coming. And investing in a traditional market or following and chasing the market instead of creating the market is a great opportunity for investors. When we look at, for example, offshore wind in New York City and Brooklyn, we think about, we are getting our parts, all of that from Europe, but what about if we were able to get those parts here and build it here? What is it? The solution doesn't be the environmental justice problem when we have this huge ship drop socks in the lungs of the local community while providing renewable energy to the privileged. These are really hard questions and we need to be able to answer them together. And we need to be thinking 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out. But it has to be happening right now. So the silos no longer work. Climate change doesn't believe in silos, and we can't believe in them either. I know it sounds rhetorical, but it's the truth. It's disruptive, and the way it's conventional. The traditional investments are conventional and climate change is not. So it really means taking risks and investing in the front line, looking at the kind of work that is actually happening to move us towards energy storage, taking out peakers, and moving away from fossil fuel economy. That needs to be enhanced. That needs to be done with community. So we certainly welcome it because the time's come. And it is uncomfortable when you have to be working with folks you don't have a history of working with. But we're willing to do it because we think our survival is at stake.
I think that building those relationships are key. And I think that often without them, we're pitted against one another, right? And we need to figure out how to change that dynamic. I just was imagining how great it would be is if we could all go to Industry City for the next ICCR event, right? I mean, it's so close, and I think people probably have been there. And just to really experience physically, eventually we'll get there, being in community with one another. So I look forward to that day. So I think I have time to ask one more question, and that's something that's been on my mind a lot. And especially since you referenced the great policy changes that have happened in New York City and New York State. Investors are not accustomed necessarily to engaging in the policy arena. I mean, we feel very comfortable with the Securities and Exchange Commission and we like to stay in our lane. But I think the just transition is also something that calls us to step into some of these policy debates. And I'm just wondering how you might envision that happening, not sort of the logistics of it, but is there a role for investors in standing alongside of the community and workers in fighting for the kind of policies, like you mentioned, procurement or other issues that would allow us to really move forward together?
That's a complicated question, and I don't come from that background. I don't have a background in investments, but I can say that my understanding is that there is what drives investors is a vision to see communities thrive and to see businesses thrive. And they're not going to thrive in the worlds that we've inherited, this world that's going to be impacted by climate change. And so there is a role for investors to start looking at, what does community-owned solar look like? What does food security look like? New York City, for example, most of the food comes in and out through Hunts Point, and we've got deep channels in Sunset Park, and we've got marine, we could have marine uses. How do we connect New York City to upstate farmers that are economically depressed and create an industry out of that? Literally the possibility of what can happen and how we basically can revive manufacturing, sustainable manufacturing, and other kinds of businesses is open to us. I think it just takes courage, and it takes really getting out of your comfort zone and really thinking about what do investments look like that are going to help us survive and create and strengthen social cohesion. And what we have right now is based on capitalism, and capitalism really is killing the planet. And literally we need to start thinking and getting comfortable with another economic system. And it's not because we don't like things. Those of us who come from struggle, like things, right? Because we never had them. But life has changed, and it's changing. We're not just talking about Hurricane Maria, Andrew, Irma, Superstorm Sandy, fires in California. It is literally happening all around us and taking out lots of lives. And COVID is taking out the economy, and there will be more of that. So what does that look like? How do you envision it? And how do you work with people to make sure that the economic system really honors a future that we're hoping will be real for our children? It means that investors have to also be part of that conversation, but they can't lead it. They have to be part of that conversation because especially since they're new to it. And so there's lots of opportunities, and there are businesses that are trying to do that. You see companies like Patagonia really trying to look at their economic model and change that so that it honors both their workers and the people they serve. And there are international groupings of folks that are trying to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you said really struck me about having investors, all of us, get out of our comfort zone. I mean, I think that we've learned that with the pandemic. I think that we're learning that as we watch the fight for racial justice on the streets. I think that's very true for investors. We do have our comfort zone, and that this is going to require us to get out of that and to sort of really wrestle with, we are investors, which means we're part of this capitalist system. So how do we reconcile some of these issues and some of the damage that's been done by the capitalist system and the history of it? So I think that's a very inspiring kind of thought for people to leave with. How are you going to be uncomfortable? And so I think we'll wrap it there. And then we're going to move to a panel where we're going to talk with a number of folks about the just transition. And then we're hoping to have some time after the panel to come back with you, Elizabeth, so the audience has a chance to ask questions. So I hope that you can stay with us. Thank you so much for your work. And I hope that we can continue to build relationships between our communities and do some of this great work together.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That was great. Thank you so much, Vonda and Elizabeth. You really got the ball rolling, the creative juices flowing. And there's so many threads that I think you've given the panelists to pick up on. So with that, let's bring in the other panelists. Would you welcome, please, Emily Ahasic, Director of Investor Relations at Excel Energy, Cristina Cedillo Torres, Engagement Specialist, Active Ownership at Ringo, Kevin Pranis, Marketing Manager at Liuna, and Shannon Rohan, Chief Strategy Officer at Share. And Vonda, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello again. So I have the honor of having a great panel working with me today. And you've just heard a little bit of an introduction, and I'm going to ask each panelist to do more if they want to talk about their organization. But we're going to take advantage of the fact that we have people representing an investor network. That's Shannon, company, Emily, Christina, an investor perspective, and then Kevin, a worker perspective, to really dig into what each of you see as some of the key challenges and opportunities that you've been addressing through your work on this transition. And so I wonder if we could start with Shannon, and if there's anything more that we need to know about SHARE to understand the context that you're coming from, please share that with us. But I'd love to hear from you about how you've been working on the just transition and where you see the opportunities and challenges going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Wanda. And a special thanks to you and Elizabeth and the previous programming, I think, in getting us started on the right foot with this conversation and sort of calling out the challenges and, the scale of the crisis that we're facing. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at SHARE, and as part of the reconciliation process with Indigenous peoples in Canada, at SHARE, we are committed to recognizing the Indigenous territories that we're on. So today I'm joining the session from Vancouver, British Columbia, on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. So SHARE is a unique organization in the investment space. We're a nonprofit organization. We're also a unionized workplace and a certified living wage employer. And as you said, Wanda, we represent a growing network of institutional investors and organizations. And that network includes foundations, university endowments, pension funds, trade unions, religious investors, Indigenous trusts, and asset managers. And with the support of SHARE, these organizations are really advocating for better corporate sustainability practices, shareholder engagement program, and we also do work in helping them oversee their proxy voting rights responsibly, and then more broadly in the policy advocacy space, really advocating for greater transparency and accountability in capital markets. And so just transition is a critical part of that work. And as you said, historically, SHARE has worked very closely, and our origins are actually really with the trade union movement. And so decent work, labor standards, both in Canada and internationally, has been a critical part of that work, as has our efforts, in addressing climate change. And so we've also been working on just transition alongside investors and yourself, Wanda, for a number of years. And it is a part of our shareholder engagement program. And we're really talking to companies on things like governance and oversight of just transition, transition plans, and lobbying. So those are, I think, three critical areas that form part of our engagement program and the conversations that we're having with companies. We want to know, for example, how executive compensation is linked to decarbonization targets. We want to know, in the context of transitions plans, the steps that companies are taking to minimize the impacts on workers and to consult with communities and engage in social dialogue with various stakeholders. Lobbying, as we know, is a critical challenge to the space and something that we're certainly seeing in the Canadian marketplace. And so we recently published a report looking at climate lobbying in the Canadian oil and gas sector. And among the findings, one of the ones that really stood out was that none of the companies that we benchmark are disclosing their overall spend on lobbying. So this is a serious blind spot for investors and something that we urgently need to shed light on. And so that is a really big piece. And just building one last point, I think, on the conversation that you were having with Elizabeth, and what I think is a unique part of SHARE's approach, and that's really, our starting point in looking at these issues and other systemic issues that we approach in our work our starting point is to collaborate with those who are going to be most impacted, and making sure that we get the right parties around the table. And so, that includes trade unions, that includes workers' organizations, it includes, in the Canadian context, absolutely Indigenous communities, many of whom their own economies are deeply embedded in the extractive industry, and or communities and territories in their lands and waters are being impacted negatively by oil and gas, among other extractive industries. So if we want to be a part of the solution as a network of investors, we have to start by talking to those people who are impacted. And I agree that the challenges and opportunities with that are that investors, aren't great at having uncomfortable conversations and not being the most powerful person in the room. So stepping back, sitting at another goal that's being set for other people, for investors, is something we have to do, but something we're not very good at. So I'll leave it there, Wanda,
thank you.
terms of,
Yeah, well, I think that I'm so glad that you brought that back in and echoed Elizabeth in that, because I feel like investors, we are not good at listening. And so that's going to be, again, a behavior change that we need to make, right, as we go into this work on the just transition. So now turning to you, Emily, I'm wondering if you can share with us this perspective of a company. You're at Excel and have been working on the just transition. So what does it look like from your perspective, and what are the challenges and opportunities that you're uncovering?
Thanks, Vonda. So for those who may not be familiar with us, Xcel Energy is a combined electric and gas utility. We've got operations across 8 states. And from a workforce standpoint, half of our workforce is bargaining. And as we think about our leadership in the clean energy transition, achieving 80% carbon reduction by 2030 and delivering 100% carbon-free electricity to customers by 2050, it goes a lot farther than just our generation mix, as people have alluded to throughout the course of today's conversation. And there are real economic and social issues, challenges that we need to work through collaboratively as part of that transition. So we think very much about our customers, about our communities, and about our employees. From a customer standpoint, reliability and affordability are really important for all of our customers. And as we think about retirement of coal plants and additions of renewables and new technologies that aren't yet even commercialized, making sure we keep that reliability at the forefront, as we've seen with issues recently in California, and not taking that reliability for granted, and also making sure that we're accounting for what is the cost to our customers and all of our customers so that things stay affordable for people. From a community standpoint, that sustainability is equally important. A lot of the coal plants are oftentimes in rural areas, and these economies, these communities have oftentimes depended on property tax base for decades of these coal plants, and as a key employment source for people in their communities. And so thinking about how we can introduce new investment, build new facilities, and also attract new business to those areas, so that funding that these folks have relied on for their local government, for school districts and whatnot, doesn't completely evaporate. And lastly, certainly not least, with respect to our workforce, making sure that we are giving our employees a very long runway. Every community is unique, every employee is unique. There are certainly common things we pay attention to, but people and communities are unique. And digging in and collaborating with the people, I think, as Shannon said, that are closest to those impacts, and really understanding what they are and how we can collectively mitigate them, all the stakeholders working together, is it's complicated. The conversations are not always easy, and it takes time and effort and a lot of elbow grease. I think from an opportunity standpoint, for us, the one thing about our model and our planning process, the resource planning processes, is that we are really embedded in our communities and with the stakeholder groups that we work with as a natural product of the processes that we've got in place. And so that collaboration is very helpful as we work through plans 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years, to that long horizon that Elizabeth mentioned earlier. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about from a company standpoint.
Thank you. Thanks for that perspective. And I just wanted to pick up on the worker piece a little bit as we turn next to Kevin, because Kevin is really close to workers in these industries, representing workers through the Labor's International Union. And so, Kevin, could you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing, particularly in Minnesota, around the just transition, and again, the challenges and opportunities that you want to bring into the discussion today?
Yeah, thanks, Vonda. I appreciate the opportunity. So Land in Minnesota, North Dakota represents more than 12,000 skilled construction laborers across neighboring but very different states, part of the Laborers International Union of North America, which has 500,000 members. And you can see our members, today working on a whole array of energy projects, everything from pipelines and gas distribution lines and refineries, coal, gas, and nuclear power plants, and wind and solar installations. And as everyone knows, the nation and the world are in the midst of an energy transition spurred by a global climate crisis that we recognize, and our members are on the bleeding edge of that transition. You have men and women who supported their families with jobs at power plants that provided affordable reliable electricity to millions of Minnesotans are seeing those jobs disappear, and it wasn't clear if or when the long-promised clean energy jobs would arrive. About 5 years ago, we started taking a hard look at the wind and solar industry in Minnesota, and it wasn't a pretty picture. It wasn't only that the jobs were fewer in number than the coal-powered jobs, because coal-fired power is pretty labor-intensive compared to wind and solar, which is partly why they're more economic, typically. The real problem for us was that a lot of the jobs weren't as good or as available to local workers as conventional energy. We found there was a very heavy reliance on out-of-state workforce and the use of low-wage temp labor, practices that were costing host communities tens of millions of dollars in lost economic development. And equally troubling from a climate perspective was the impact of those practices on support for clean energy. And a skilled construction worker living in rural Minnesota, watching crews from Texas and Oklahoma build an energy project in your backyard that you're going to pay for your rates potentially, and you thought was going to put people like you to work. And so we had people reacting and saying, I'll never support another wind farm if this is how they're getting built. Mm-hmm. So we're a democratic organization. Our leaders have to answer to members. And so what I'm very proud of is that our leaders, instead of hitting the brakes on energy transition and fighting this, we said, we need to fix this. It's too important. And so we went to elected officials and regulators and utility partners like Xcel, clean energy industry, and said we need to figure this out and make it right before it's too late. And we were able to persuade our Public Utility Commission to start requiring transparency and accountability in terms of reporting on where those jobs were going, who was benefiting from them, and starting to factor that into decisions. We were able to get the energy industry to the table, and work with allies like Xcel, we were able to turn it around. So we've gone from 10 to 15% of jobs being filled by local workers 5 years ago to more than 60% local workers in almost all union jobs today. And going forward into the future, we think these will be majority local, overwhelmingly union projects that create good jobs similar to the jobs produced in conventional energy. I think, and that was good for climate and consumers because, our organization has been strongly supporting the governor's comprehensive energy legislation. We entered into a historic agreement with Xcel involving closing coal plants and building wind and solar. And I think, we can talk more about that later, but it's a big contrast to North Dakota, where we're still struggling, with an industry that is, the politics become toxic because of closing coal plants and the impacts that having. And unfortunately, there just aren't enough workers who got a chance to work on a wind farm locally because the industry failed to prioritize local workforce. So we're struggling right now to turn that situation around. But I think it provides the contrast and explains why it's so important for climate that we bring local workers to the table.
Yeah, no, I think it's such an important issue. It's really, and Elizabeth talked about this too, it's sort of like the hidden costs of the work that we're all doing to move to a lower carbon economy. What is the impact that is an unintended consequence? And the local jobs issue is huge, and it's something that we've talked about in the ICCR community too, that sort of simple transition that you want to make from a coal-fired plant to wind or to renewables. Those jobs don't line up. You're going from a really decent job to something that might pay minimum wage with no health and safety standards, and this local hire issue, I think, is important. So thanks for highlighting that, and thanks, Kevin, for all the work that you've done in Minnesota, because I think that it provides us a good example of how we might work at these issues in a local way, which I feel like people have referenced, right? There's this sort of big issue of the just transition, but we're only going to figure out how to do it in our places at Xcel, with the local company, in the local places that Shannon's working in Canada, in Minnesota, and in North Dakota, and in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. So thanks for that. I want to turn now to Christina to give us a perspective on an investor who's been working on the just transition for a while. What can you share with us, Christina, that would really add an investor voice into the conversation from the perspective of having worked on the just transition and some of the challenges and opportunities that you see coming at us?
Yes, thank you so much, Fonda, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. For those who are not familiar yet with Robeco, we're a global asset manager based in the Netherlands with 155 billion euros of assets under management, and sustainability strategies are at the core also of our work. So I am from the active ownership team. So indeed, I am working on engaging with our invested companies, particularly in the electric utilities sector. And our belief really is that, in order for the energy transition to happen, we need to bring indeed the social aspect into it. And we think that not having a social plan in place to address the adverse impacts of the energy transition will lead to slowing down the progress there. So in terms of challenges, I think the speed needed to transition to cleaner energy, to a low carbon economy, I really see that as a major challenge for the social, incorporating the social aspects, because as others have also mentioned, what the energy transition really is about technological transition, developments, innovation, and bringing in the social dimension into it, adapting to the use of these new technologies and adoption at the broader scale is definitely a challenge, I think, where a significant engagement with all kinds of stakeholders is needed. So I think, on the other hand, there's also several opportunities. I think companies can certainly start preparing, and we think that those companies that have already taken steps to define for their climate strategy, and they know how their businesses need to transform on their low carbon economy, they're also better positioned to take steps into bringing the social dimension on what exactly will that mean for their employees and for other stakeholders. So now we are, 4 years after the launch of the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and I think most companies by now are well aware of the need to identify climate-related risks and opportunities. And we have seen also significant progress over the last couple of years of companies really stepping up their level of ambition to become carbon neutral by 2050 and setting intermediate targets as well. So we think that the moment is right now to really start making an assessment of what do these business strategies actually mean for the social for the employees and for other stakeholders. And I think this really entails, companies taking due diligence and really the same way that they try to identify risk and opportunities on the energy transition. I think they can also try to replicate that model with engagement with other social stakeholders and have a policy to respond to those challenges. I do think that the utility sector also has some experience already with closing down the assets, and these companies can leverage definitely from the lessons learned from this process. But certainly what we see is that a more comprehensive approach still needs to be developed.
Yeah, no, I think that we've learned some lessons, right? And we have some models. So where you are in Europe, there's a social dialogue that is entails really companies talking and meeting with their workforce. We don't have the social dialogue construct in the U.S. Utilities, as you mentioned, though, do have this long familiarity with engaging with stakeholders. And so I feel like what we need to do is to take the little pieces of knowledge that we've gained from working on this in other countries and other places, our own local experiences, and sort of bringing these lessons to the forefront. So I'm going to do another round of questions with our panelists, but I just wanted to pause a moment and let the audience know that we are going to provide an opportunity for you to ask a few questions. Hopefully, we'll have time to do that. And so to do that, you have to scroll to the bottom of the platform and you'll see a box where you can type in your question. Just to let you know, though, if you are on a full screen, you'll have to escape the full screen in order to be able to scroll down to find that box. So please throw your questions or your comments, frankly, and we can have a discussion there. So I just wanted to then turn a little bit to, maybe some more practical needs. And so, again, really asking for each of the panelists to speak from your unique perspective. What do we need to move the just transition forward, right? So, again, our audience here is investors. We're trying to understand all of the ways we can engage. Shannon talked about the need for more corporate disclosure around climate risk, and also lobbying and political expenditures. So there's a whole array of things that we're practiced at doing, but we need to do more. We're not there yet. We've already talked about how complicated it is, how we need to have uncomfortable conversations. I'm just wondering from each of you, though, if you could share a few thoughts on what you think we need to do, and particularly keeping in mind the role of investors in what we can do to move the just transition work forward. And maybe I'll just, I'll start in the reverse order, just for fun. So Christina, do you want to start, kind of ground us in the investor's perspective on that question?
Yeah, sure. So I certainly think that we need more dialogue across different stakeholders. I certainly think that exchanging experiences in platforms like this one is definitely something that we need. I mean, for shareholders, well, for investors, we are a bit far away from, the companies, the stakeholders. So for us, sometimes it's a bit difficult to get a better understanding of the local context, the local impacts, because that's also something that has been already mentioned by several panelists now. And we definitely understand that, this just transition topic is very much context dependent. And the fact that different jurisdictions will also deal differently with this topic really adds a new layer of complexity for companies and for investors alike. So, and also what is the role of the regulators? I think there's a lot to be gained from further engagement among different parties.
That's a good one. The regulators, that's just the group that we're accustomed to doing. Maybe, Kevin, you can pick up on that one in a minute too, but go ahead and finish, Christina. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Thank you. At the same time, I think also it has been mentioned that the topic of just transition is relatively new for the investment industry. I think with climate change and the energy transition, we have started much earlier with those discussions with companies. We have seen now gaining traction. But the topic of just transition, I think, is still, it can be developed further, a framework of what exactly do we mean, have a consensus among investors on what are the expectations, and also together with companies, what is it that can actually be achieved. So I certainly think there is a lot to be gained from further collaboration in the industry with other stakeholders to develop a minimum framework of engagement on this topic. Also, maybe further down the road, investors like to measure everything, performance. How are we going to actually track progress? So what type of metrics or indicators or concrete issues we should be paying attention in order to be able to say, when are we happy?
No, and I just made me think too that just on the lines of what we've been discussing in terms of taking unusual steps in different relationships and breaking down silos, that we're going to have to figure out how to do things a little bit differently, and maybe the way that we measure things as investors needs to be examined as well. So, all right. So, Kevin, and from you, what do you think that we need? In your experience, you've done a great job of bringing together folks some lessons learned in Minnesota, including regulators, along with workers, talking to companies. Do you want to share any of that and talk about what you think that we need to do as investors to move this agenda forward?
Yeah, sure. So we're lucky in Minnesota. I think we have the best regulators in the whole country.
All right.
One of them. We need to figure out how to socialize these ideas in a lot of other states where they're not grasping the relevance of jobs and these transitions to the decisions that are being made on energy. It's been a struggle for a lot of our affiliates in other places to even get the commissions to pay attention. And it took us a little work at the beginning too. It's an unfamiliar issue, but environmental issues were also unfamiliar to commissions when they started looking at them. Most commissions now are quite familiar with those issues. And so we could use everyone's help just making clear to regulators these are legitimate, important issues. But I think in terms of what we need for investors, I think it's paying closer attention to what you're investing in, really. And this is not unique to climate or clean energy. This is a problem we get across, the 50,000 foot, picture that investors get versus the reality on the ground that our members see or the non-union workers that we talk to see are often radically different. And that's also true, no less true of clean energy. In fact, it's often overlooked in clean energy. And so, having that commitment to local jobs and responsible contracting, just to give an example, there was a project in Washington State where a temp worker was buried alive in a trench because it wasn't shored properly. He was jumping in to rescue another temp worker who was being buried alive, and he rescued the other temp worker and then died himself. All of this because the wind developer and contractor just failed to do the basic things that were needed to keep people safe. And there's a whole bunch of corporate customers that were bought in that project. There's investors that were in that project. They didn't need local workers there. There were all kinds of problems. And, people should know that before that kind of problem happens. And so, and we can certainly help. And the other thing is, I think it's really important in climate. I think one of the most interesting things for me getting into climate work was how much the polarization on climate has restricted the vision not only of people who try to deny climate or sort of dismiss its impacts, but also restricts the vision of those who are all in committed to solutions on climate, but find that their scope gets narrower and narrower. So, we used to talk about carbon capture, which is still an incredibly relevant technology. There's a set of folks who are like, no, can't talk about carbon capture anymore because we're past that. It's wind, solar, and batteries, people. And if we say it often enough, it's going to be true. And it's just not, that's what it is. It's not a big tent. It's not an actual solution. And so it's really important to have a big picture about how energy works, to think about, when Dominion, divests its gas assets to Berkshire Hathaway, that doesn't mean those gas assets went away. They just shifted ownership here. So try to keep an eye on the picture and how it all works together. Be patient and engage and talk to workers who, do the front line, to borrow Elizabeth's phrase, the frontline energy workers who have a different perspective that's at least worth hearing.
So that's not a small challenge, but keep an eye on the big picture and then also pay attention to the details. So there's a good challenge for all of us. So Emily, what does a company need from investors?
It's interesting, Donna. I think a number of the things cited by both Christina and Kevin are things that we talk about as well. There certainly are trade-offs. That big picture is important, and having clarity and alignment on those clean energy standards. We work across 8 states. They are different states, and as I mentioned before, the impacts are very localized, and so being mindful of those factors is important. And I think also, particularly as we get to the latter part of the transition, and I'm talking farther out, that last 20%, but work that needs to occur today for us to get there, really thinking about flexibility in how we embrace new technologies. To Kevin's point, there's more than 3 options. There are things that we probably not thought of today that are going to be here when someone else is in our chairs in the future, and really recognizing that some flexibility to balance that cost and the reliability and the progression of the change is really important, and investment and participation there.
Okay, thank you. All right, Shannon. What about from Cher and from your work in this arena? What do you think that should be on the front minds of investors?
Yeah, I think really building on the comments from the other panelists, I think what we're seeing is we need to keep doing what we've been doing. We need to keep engaging the companies. We need to keep talking about greenhouse gas emission reductions and corporate governance that is fit for purpose and proper human capital management that doesn't allow this kind of subcontracting with no oversight of occupational health and safety. We need to keep doing that. But at the same time, the two spaces that I see that we need to move into, which are uncomfortable zones, I think in many ways, is on the one hand, that really local level. How do we replicate what we're seeing in Minnesota? How do we replicate the work of Lena and Kevin and Emily in Minnesota? How do we work in those spaces and have investors proactively participating in those spaces and proactively communicating their expectations of that kind of local level cooperation and transition planning? And then the second space, I think, is really moving back up to that 300,000, miles, level, which is the big policy advocacy space. And I think one of the things that we need to see is we need to adopt an emergency mindset. And investors have an enormous role to play in, not sort of the cute, oh, cool, we're all good, we've got this under control. No, we actually don't. And we don't really have the tools. Like the tools that we've used in investment management and risk management historically are not fit for purpose. We know that. So we have to adopt an emergency mindset. Investors have a really important role to play to be calling that out publicly and explicitly. And then talking to policymakers, at a global level, at a national level, at a regional level, with that, mindset and urgency in place. And so, I do think that policy place is so important, and our silence there, it really makes the other voices much, much louder. So we got to start showing up in those spaces.
I think that's so true. I also was just thinking about the work that Cher has done and what we might learn from you about bringing workers' voices into the due diligence process, right? So it's something that we don't think about much of it as investors. We hire managers to do diligence for us, but what if we actually got in there ourselves and really saw a much wider range of due diligence? What would that look like for us to look at those impacts? I was just imagining, I don't know who the investors are in the development that's happening in Industry City, but what it might look like. I'm sort of stuck on this now, having investors go to Sunset Park and really talk with some of the community members and listen and learn, as opposed to just kind of staying removed from the process, which is really the place that we feel most comfortable. Sometimes we've been turning our money over to managers and then just not even, asking any questions, not getting involved, which is, I think, sometimes how the managers prefer it. We're going to have to really step over that void and get more involved. So a couple resources that I just thought of. One, when Christina was talking, the work that I've done at the Initiative for Responsible Investment with ICCR over the last year has included developing a set of investor expectations of companies on the just transition. And so we're about ready to send that out to all of you. And then Kevin's been hard at work on a project with Ceres and others to really look at what are the standards that can be built into the renewable sector that would really lift the standards up for workers and community impacted communities for all the whole ecosystem, the buyers, the developers, the companies, the investors, and then of course the workers and the communities as well. So we're going to have lots of resources to share with folks over the next couple of months. So one last question, unless people have, I don't know, maybe I'll just pause here and see, does anyone have a question for someone else on the panel? Since I get to ask all of mine. Do you have questions for each other? It's okay if not. Just throw it in there, interrupt me if you do. So the last question really, again, I want to remind people to put their questions in the chat or in the box at the bottom if you scroll down from the screen. It's really, what are we all going to do next? And sometimes it's, we have a conversation like this and there's ideas, it seems so hard, but we have to start somewhere, right? And we have to build on the work that each other's doing. So where should we start? what are you going to do next? And then I'm going to ask the same question to the audience. So what are you going to do next? So who wants to start?
I'll go, Vonda.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So I referenced our main processes and our longer term goal, and we filed a resource plan, integrated resource plan in Minnesota a while back, which I know kept very familiar with, and we will be doing that same thing in Colorado in 2021. And so these discussions of resources and reliability and jobs and community economic impact and sustainability, all of those things will be part of that dialogue with stakeholders, just as they have been in the upper Midwest. And so it really is a continuation, not something brand new, but a continuation of the process that we are working to make sure we've got very tangible plans and some agility as things go forward and new technologies are developed, so that we can deliver on our promise to investors and to our consumers and our stakeholders.
All right, thank you. Shannon, do you want to go next? I saw you take yourself off mute, so I just assumed. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I think I'm good now. So what are we going to do? I mean, I think we will continue. We are expanding our engagement program to now be talking about with renewable energy and clean tech companies about the issues that Kevin raised in his comments about, good jobs with, collective bargaining, jobs with, decent benefits, sick leave, all of the things that workers need in order to thrive. And so that's a new area of our engagement program. We'll continue to be putting people at the center and in our conversations and our work. And that includes our ongoing work with Indigenous communities in Canada, which, is something that we've been particularly committed to. One of the things that I'm super interested in that I just saw this morning in the Responsible Investor article is this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty effort. I don't know if people have seen it. It's a free article in responsibleinvestor.com this morning. But basically, it's a proposal based on the 3 pillars of the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and looking at how to apply that to fossil fuels and the supply side of fossil fuels. So I'm going to look into that more also and see, is that a place where we need investor voices?
Right, thank you. Kevin?
So 2 things. One, North Dakota, we're trying to rescue a bad situation in North Dakota where probably the most valuable clean energy resource in the entire upper Midwest, a HVDC line that could carry 2,000 megawatts of wind is being stranded by a backlash against clean energy. And so we're trying to get the industry players, developers to partner with us so that we could put local people to work and try to turn that situation around so that we could supply clean energy needs from North Dakota, which otherwise is at risk. The other is we're really excited about hydrogen, in particular some of the natural gas innovations, working with Centerpoint and Excel, figuring out. We have 800 members who work in distribution, mostly gas distribution lines. If we can leverage that existing infrastructure and save those jobs by reducing the carbon and turning it into one of the solutions, then that could be a huge win for ratepayers, for our members, for everybody. So we're looking forward to working with folks on those kind of innovations. Again, wind and solar and batteries are great, but there's another huge set of technologies that are relevant that we need to be equally focused on.
That sounds exciting. Good luck in North Dakota. And Christina, what's next for you?
Yes, thank you. I think for us, really engaging with companies or investee companies is really the strongest tool that we can use in the process to continue to raise awareness among these companies that, this is a topic that is important for us, and explain also how we look at it. I must say that so far we have been focusing mostly on electric utilities, simply because I think the the just transition angle is a little bit clearer also, since the fate of coal is a lot more eminent than for other industries. But we are actually going to be expanding on this work for other sectors. So this will also be a learning experience for us, because I think the just transition topic, it will look differently, certainly for different sectors. So this is something that we will be developing in the coming months as well. So
right, yes,
lots of work.
We're all learning together. So I think that's great. And welcome back, Elizabeth. Thanks for staying for the question and answer part. I think that the ICCR staff is going to feed me some questions because I can't see any of them from where I sit. So if you want to put them in the chat for me, then I'll try to pose them to the panelists. Since I don't have any questions yet, I guess I do. I was going to sort of bring Elizabeth into the conversation just to see if you had a reaction to anything that someone said.
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I do. First, I want to say that a just transition is not justice is central to that word. It's something you can define, redefine, repurpose, appropriate. It comes from the front lines of the climate crisis. I also want to flag that the conversation about polarizing cap and trade is something that was a false solution that millions and millions of dollars and years was invested in. And the cemetery is full with the bodies of my people, the Puerto Ricans, the Black people, because of false solutions. And so when you are thinking about this, I really would urge you not to be thinking about the social impact as a dimension. It is central. You are investing literally in sustaining life, not wealth. And if you are not in that place where you are thinking about it right now in that way, then I don't know what to say. I remember the civil rights movement, it moved slowly to accommodate people's privilege and people's fears and people's needs. And again, the cemeteries are filled with all the lives that it cost because it moved slowly to accommodate those needs. And I'm hearing that also with climate change, that we need to move and be thoughtful and think about all of the different false solutions and false promises because we need to be able to pay people. There's also a cost to health, a cost to homelessness, a cost to a loss of energy, a cost to everything that comes with the disruption of climate change. And that needs to be incorporated into how we think about investments moving forward. We can't be thinking in conventional ways. Just because you call it a just transition doesn't mean that it is. Hydrogen, for example, and I agreed with a lot with what Kevin said, hydrogen is a false solution. It's an extraction. And if we've learned anything about climate change, is that we need to stop taking things out of the earth and we need to start looking toward renewable energy. And just because we call it clean, it may not be clean. The process might not be clean. So I would strongly urge you to pair up with the frontline leaders who are doing this work on the ground and to think about the really innovative ways, which are not so innovative, by the way, when you think about them. They're really ways that honor our ancestors because we've always lived within our carbon footprint and we're basically putting on a technological spin to the work that we've done historically in our communities. So it concerns me because it's not social. The social has to be, life has to be central right now. Yep. And we're talking about its impact in every way. So I don't want to get like on a soapbox, but you are in a position to influence people and to make decisions that affect how infrastructure gets invested in, how we look at food security, how we look at energy systems, how we take entire communities off the grid. And that really is where you should be using your resources, your imagination, and your brain trust. And so I would just strongly urge you to do that.
No, I think
I'll be quiet now.
No, dear, I don't want you to be quiet at all. I think that's a really important thing to bring into the conversation. I mean, I think that it is true that as investors, we have these layers that protect us from the real world sometimes, and we're asking people to come out of their, kind of comfort zone and engage in these really hard discussions. And it's not easy, right? And we're talking about life and death. I mean, Kevin gave us a tragic story of workers losing their lives, and you've experienced it in your community as well. So we're not talking about something abstract. We're talking about something very real. the impact on people's lives, their livelihoods, and really the impact on the planet and the ground that we walk on. So I think taking it seriously and not letting, the way things have been done in the past discourage us. So I just wanted to sort of go to a couple of questions. This one I think is sort of related to this topic. It says, we can't allow just transition concerns to delay the transition to a low carbon economy, right? So there's always this sort of trade-off. People feel like, oh, that takes too long, bring in the community and workers, and we can't afford that. Of course, we can't afford not to do that. So the question is, how can we ensure that we meet the Paris goals and ensure that the costs of the transition are borne equitably? I'll leave it open for anyone who wants to address that question.
I'd be happy to take a crack at that. Just to be clear, I don't think what we're not talking about delaying adoption of sort of new technology just in order to keep people employed. And there's certainly other ways to sort of like do those costs. I think that but I mean, a lot of these things are quite complicated to implement. And I think that's what, the folks who work on these systems every day recognize. These changes are not simple at all. And it has to stay reliable and it has to stay affordable. And if it's not reliable and affordable, you risk a backlash. I think nothing impressed me more than the yellow vest protests in France that were from a gas tax increase. It was just a gas tax increase. That wasn't a radical redoing of energy, right? That was just, reaction to a gas increase. And so we want to move as fast as we can. And when there are efforts that are poorly planned that move too fast and there's a backlash, we're seeing this in North Dakota. Now we're going to be set back 10 years in terms of our progress, and we're going to lose progress towards solving climate because we didn't plan for it well enough. And so it's not asking people to be employed to put more carbon out for nothing. It's about, creating runways for those people and planning adequately so everyone can believe in this transition and know that their lights will still work and their vehicles will work and they will be able to heat their homes.
So thanks for that, Kevin. There's so many questions. I'm a little overwhelmed. I'm not quite sure how to capture them all. And so hopefully I'm just going to make a suggestion. I don't know if this is possible, but I know that there's a reception after the panel, a virtual reception. And so hopefully I'm going to stay. I hope some of all the panelists can stay as well, and maybe people can ask individual questions there. I'll pose another one. I think we have time for one or two more. And so this one is, I just lost it. So how do investors and unions ensure that fenceline communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and women who often are not part of the current energy economy can be part of the future green economy? I'm guessing that you have something to say about that, Elizabeth, and others can jump in. Oh, you're on mute.
I would say that there are a lot of organizations where the leadership is Black, Indigenous, and women of color. Certainly my organization is, but the Solutions Project has a number of organizations all over the country that are led by Black, Indigenous, and women of color that are operationalizing a just transition on the ground. The Climate Justice Alliance, Movement Generation, there's quite a few. I do think that there is a problem with resources, that a lot of the resources go to grass top organizations that have been around for a long time, and that we need to start moving resources to the front line of the climate crisis that are coming up with really innovative ways of operationalizing just transitions. And it is happening. We did launch the first community-owned solar cooperative in the state of New York just this past year. Those things are happening in our communities all over the country. And so these are partnerships. And then in leading and what these partnerships look like, we use the HEMES principles for democratic organizing. And the HEMES principles talk about building just relationships and engaging in self-transformation. Those principles are sort of the roadway, the roadmap on how we get out of these uncomfortable spaces and start building the kind of consensus that Emily was talking about, Kevin was talking about. I think Christina, to try to remember all the different things you all said, but it is possible, and we're seeing it happen in different parts of the country. Not at the level that we'd like, but that's because the investments are not there, and that's because the resources are going to grass top organizations that spend a lot of their resources on policy and not on operationalizing a vision.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on that question? All right, so there's a bunch of requests in the comments or in the questions about resources. And so I just was thinking that too, Elizabeth, congratulations on the community-led solar cooperative. I think that's so exciting. I want to learn more. And so I guess this is just a call out to everybody that if you have resources to share, people are looking for you for case studies. There's an interest in sort of having companies like Excel take what they learn and apply it to other places. So I think that we're really in hopefully an intensive learning experience from one another. And so I think that rather than going to more questions, I'm going to leave it there and just take a minute to thank all of you for your time, not just your time today, but really all the work that you do. I feel like we have benefited from hearing about a long track record of work that Cher has done in Canada, some really innovative work happening there. Really the experience that you bring into this, Elizabeth, is tremendous. And I hope we can continue to learn from you. Xcel Energy, a leader in the field, and Kevin, very innovative what you're doing in Minnesota, and hopefully you can take that to other places, and we can help you with some of those standards that you've come up with into the sort of broader set of stakeholders in the ecosystem that we want to work with in the renewable sector. And then Christina, thanks for your leadership, not just on this issue here, but really I think in the community work that ICCR has led around the just transition. You've been a really, really important voice for all of us to learn from. So thanks everyone. And I think I'm going to just ask the audience to enjoy the rest of the program. And once again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Frank Sherman, the current chair of ICCR's governing board. I want to thank Vonda Brunstein, our keynote speaker and moderator, and all the panelists for a great conversation. You have given us all a great deal of food for thought. Just transition to a low carbon economy is an area where I believe the prophetic voice of ICCR members can make a unique contribution. I now have the distinct pleasure of presenting ICCR's 2020 Legacy Award. ICCR's Legacy Award was created to honor those whose work has provided a strong moral foundation and an enduring record of demonstrated influence on corporate policies. The award was created in 2011 as a celebration of our 40th anniversary of ICCR. As we approach our 50th year, this award provides us an opportunity to recognize some of our most distinguished leaders. I am pleased to present this year's award to my fellow ICCR colleague and former board chair, Susan Smith-Makos, Vice President of Social Responsibility at Mercy Investment Services. Susan has been a powerful advocate for the common good, a thoughtful and skilled professional with a deep commitment to shareholder advocacy that advances social justice and the building of a sustainable world. Through her deep knowledge, dedication, and collaboration, Susan has helped numerous organizations live out their missions and values through shareholder engagement. Susan has shared her time and talent with the ICCR community in many ways. Notably, Susan served in leadership roles at ICCR, including 6 years on the board of directors, 2 years of which she acted as board chair. She currently serves as a member of ICCR's investment committee and has previously served on the finance committee and many other working groups. In her work at Mercy Investment Services, Susan has exemplified who we are as ICCR. She is truly inspired by faith and committed to action, and has helped us to be the organization we profess to be. Investors seeking a triple bottom line: social, environmental, and financial sustainability. Congratulations, Susan, on this well-deserved recognition of your many contributions to ICCR and your many achievements in shareholder engagement.
spirit and the passion of the 70s when corporate engagement was first started continues into the future. And as faith communities are resource constrained, we shouldn't forget that this is important advocacy work too, that all should be engaged in. It's not only faith communities, but it's those who care about environmental, social issues, that working through with companies is important to driving change, and realizing, I think, at least for us as a Catholic organization, the call from Pope Francis in Laudato Si to care for our common home. Because our common home is not just the environment, it's how do we elevate this whole world together, the people who live there, the conditions that they live in, to a better world, to the common good.
What sheer delight to celebrate you, Susan Smith Makos, and your legacy to shareholder responsibility and this ICCR community, even if we have to celebrate at a distance and virtually.
The good news is that eventually there will be additional celebrations in person, and of course I want to be at every single one of them. Susan established a new high bar for the ICCR community, not just in various issue groups, but in the overall governance of ICCR.
Susan has dedicated her career to addressing environmental and social justice issues in order to create a just and sustainable world. She has always worked to bring together new and different voices around the table, both faith-based and secular, to strengthen our collective voices to achieve our common goals.
She brings a blend of skills, of course, the foundation of her faith perspective, but also legal skills that help us as we negotiate or dialogue with companies on key issues affecting their policies or practices.
Susan's background and experience in healthcare and her deep understanding of the healthcare system in the U.S. really informed our work as we developed principles for healthcare reform, which we took to a number of companies and got over 30 companies to endorse. And this was right in the middle of the national debate on healthcare reform, as we know, which eventually led to the passage of the Affordable Care Act.
Her vision, passion, and dedication for socially responsible investing has attracted many new colleagues to this work and touched everyone that has been blessed to work alongside her. Susan's dedication and work ethic is second to none. She's wonderful to work with, but most importantly, I am honored to call her my friend.
It is a special honor to endorse this legacy award to Susan. She's left a substantial legacy, not just at ICCR, but in the broader sustainability community. She's been a distinct pleasure to work with and a very deserving recipient of this award.
It's such a pleasure to know and work with you, Susan. In short, I'm so glad you're in my life.
After making sure that we have celebrated longtime members in the ICCR community, it's only right that your time has come. You're a special friend and colleague. Abundant blessings and congratulations.
Thank you, Frank, for your kind comments, and to those who shared their thoughts on the video, to the ICCR board for this honor. It is a humbling experience to receive this award and to be thought of with previous Legacy Award honorees on whose shoulders all ICCR members stand as we carry this important work forward. It is moments like this that we remember the people who have made a difference in our lives. When one contemplates a legacy, and by the way, I do think there's still another chapter or two to come, it starts first with my parents, who taught me by their example the importance of serving others, and the greater good. I am fortunate that my husband Jim and my sister Ann are joining us. They are so important to me and such an important support team for me. I also think of the Sisters of Mercy and other women religious who have inspired me and who enlivened in me a passion and a determination to work for a more just and sustainable world. While this beautiful award that you see behind me may have my name on it, know that whatever my contributions to ICCR have been, this truly has been a team effort. My colleagues at Mercy Investment Services, Brian, Pat, Katie, Tom, and the rest of the team, and my many collaborators within ICCR have been important partners, supporting each other in ICCR's mission. One of my blessings that I carry forward are the friendships that I know will carry on. As I close, I have to say I've been debating about my final thoughts. And as you probably know, for a lawyer, debates can be never ending. Over the weekend, I decided I would share both with you. The first is from Micah, book 6, where he asks, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. These are words that have always inspired me personally. The second, when I think of ICCR, the important work it has done and will continue to do in these challenging times, is a statement from Margaret Mead, who said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Again, many thanks, and let's head to the reception.
Congratulations again, Susan, on this much-deserved recognition for your incredible achievements and your contributions to our coalition, and also for the really important reminder that we don't do this work alone. Please imagine our entire community standing and wildly applauding you, and we will all be toasting you shortly. And that ends our program. We want to again thank all of our terrific speakers, Elizabeth Yampierre, Emily Ahasic, Cristina Cedillo Torres, Kevin Pranis, and Shannon Rowan, and of course, our terrific moderator, Vonda Brinsting. And as Vonda said, this is of course only the beginning of the conversation.
And we want to thank all of you today for joining us, and again, extend a special thanks to our sponsors. And now for those who are able, we invite you to get a drink or grab a snack and rejoin us at our reception set for 5:15 Eastern time, where we can meet up with old friends, make new ones, and mingle virtually. See you there.